Harlem. The sit-down clocked in at exactly 47 minutes. Brother Bumpy, if you want to do right by me, if you want to help our people, give me your word. You're signing your own death warrant, Johnson said, his voice dead flat, unable to grasp the logic. You're letting them punch your ticket when I'm handing you an out? I'm choosing not to put dozens of our own in the ground just to buy myself a couple more years. Malcolm shot back. Brother Bumpy, the guy's coming for me. Sure, they want me dead, but they ain't bad men. They're lost. They've been played. They think they're doing the Lord's work because Elijah Muhammad fed them a line that I'm a rat hurting the nation. They got it wrong, but there's no malice in 'em. They're brothers who got sold a bill of goods by the bosses they trusted. And the top brass, Elijah, the officers, the coordinators, they're crooked and they got no spine. But they're still black men. Still our blood. Still part of the neighborhood I spent my life trying to build up. How do I stand for our freedom if I take a deal that means wiping out dozens of our own? How do I tell folks to stop the infighting when my own life depends on you whacking my enemies? Swear to me that after I'm gone, and I'll be gone soon. I can't. I won't. It ain't right, and I won't have a hand in it. Johnson stood up, pacing behind his desk, the aggravation plain on his face. So you're just gonna lay down and take it? Gonna let them hit you? Leave Betty and the girls with no husband, no father? Gonna let the nation take the pot? Let them shut up the only voice talking sense about Elijah's racket? That's your play? That's my play, Malcolm said, cool as ice. I made my peace with it. But Brother Bumpy, Malcolm leaned in, his eyes locking onto Johnson like he was sighting a target. I didn't come here to take your deal, but to put one on the table. You want to show me respect? You want to do something real when I'm gone? Then I'm asking for something tougher than just taking out my enemies. I'm asking you to change how you do business. You'll put a stop to black men dropping other black men. I'm asking you to break the chain that's been wrecking our neighborhood for generations. Johnson stopped his pacing and sat back down, realizing Malcolm came to this sit-down with an agenda that went way past protection. What's the ask? Malcolm took a breath, measuring his words like gold dust. He knew this would sound crazy to a guy who spent 40 years cracking heads to hold onto his chair. Give me your word. Swear to me that when I'm gone, you'll stop our men from gunning down our men. Not in your outfit, not in beefs between operators, not over turf or cash or respect. No more hitting black hoods by other black hoods. Find another way to settle the score. Squeeze 'em financially, lean on the neighborhood, sit down and talk. Rough 'em up if you got to. Do anything but put 'em in a box. Break the pattern, Brother Bumpy. No more hits over turf. No more bodies over cash. No more blood spilled between brothers. Show the other bosses that business can be handled without spilling family blood. Prove that black men can be strong and powerful and respected without constantly burying each other. The room went dead silent. The three guys watching said Johnson's face went from disbelief to confusion, then straight to anger. And finally, something that looked like he got it, understanding what Malcolm was truly asking and why Malcolm put this above his own skin. Brother Malcolm, Johnson finally said, keeping his voice steady and low. What you're asking is a heavier lift than you know. Muscle ain't optional in my line of work. It's how you keep the crown. It's how you make sure people nod when you walk in the room. It's the final gavel when talking don't get the job done. If I tell my crew we don't clip the competition when they step out of line, we look soft. That puts blood in the water for sharks who know we won't bite back hard. I could lose everything I constructed brick by brick. Find a different route. Show the other bosses how to move smart. Break this machine that's chewing us up. I know, Malcolm said, keeping it plain. I get the heavy price of the ticket. I'm asking you to gamble the whole operation on a belief. To throw out the rule book that's kept you on top for 40 years. I'm asking you to run business in a way that bleeds your wallet and turf, losing face with guys who think power only comes from a gun. I know it's a heavy lift, but Brother Bumpy, look at the bigger picture we paint. if you make this play. Think what it says if Bumpy Johnson, the scariest man in Harlem, who stayed alive 4 decades by being brutal, decides we stop dropping our own kind. The other bosses will fall in line behind you. The young soldiers coming up will learn a new game. The wheel stops spinning. Maybe not today, maybe not all the way, but it slows down. And that counts for more than holding on to every street corner you own right now. That matters more than me breathing air. That's a war worth waging. That's how you respect my memory. Not by clipping my enemies, but by refusing to let our people slaughter one another. Johnson stayed silent for a long stretch, his mind running the numbers and the fallout. He was trying to figure how to pull off this favor without burning his whole organization to the ground. What happens when a guy won't sit down and talk? Johnson finally asked. When an operator wants my turf and the only language he speaks is lead? What's my move if I gave my word not to put him in the ground? Malcolm stood up, knowing he'd laid his cards on the table and pressing harder would spoil the pot. But with his hand on the knob, he turned back to face Johnson one last time. And the words he dropped next, verified by 3 guys in the room, would haunt Johnson until his dying day. My number is up soon, Brother Bumpy. Maybe next week, maybe next month, but the clock is ticking. The shooters will be our own people. The contract is signed. I can't stop the hit, and I won't let you try to stop it by stacking up bodies of our brothers. 9 days later, Sunday, February 21st, 1965. Malcolm X took the stand at the Audubon Ballroom. But after they punch my ticket, when you see the ugly face of our own destroying the ones trying to help, remember this: sit down. I need you to pick a lane. Either keep business as usual, wasting brothers over blocks and envelopes and pride, or flip the script. Honor me not by settling the score for my death, but by stopping the next funeral. Jam the gears. Break the mold. Show the neighborhood there's another route. That's the ask. That's my last favor. Give me your word, Brother Bumpy. Swear that my end will be the last time you let our men clip each other without moving heaven and earth to stop it. Promise me you'll make the effort. Johnson didn't speak right away. He couldn't answer because the request sounded impossible. It felt like a handshake that would cost Johnson his whole kingdom. It sounded like the kind of dreamer talk that put men in early graves in Johnson's world. He was ready to talk to 400 souls when 3 guys, Talmadge Hare, Norman 3X Butler, and Thomas 15X Johnson. But Malcolm didn't wait for a yes or no. He just nodded, tipping his hat to the weight of the request. He walked out of the office, down the steps, and into the cold Harlem afternoon. He left Johnson in his chair, trying to figure if the ask was pure guts or just plain suicide. 9 days later, Malcolm X was gone. The fallout. Bumpy Johnson got the word about the hit at roughly 3:45 in the afternoon on Sunday, February 21st, 1965. One of his soldiers kicked through the door of his spot on West 139th Street with the news that Malcolm caught lead at the Audubon Ballroom. The hit went down in front of a packed house. Malcolm's wife and kids were right there in the front row. Malcolm was checking out. Harlem was a powder keg ready to blow. Johnson tore down to Columbia Presbyterian Hospital where they hauled Malcolm, finding a circus with the heat swarming everywhere. Charged the front with pistols and a sawed-off, pumping round after round into Malcolm. Nation of Islam guys were already washing their hands, claiming they were clean of the shooting. Malcolm's crew was howling that the nation had clipped him. Press vultures were swarming. And Betty Shabazz stood there paralyzed, drenched in her husband's blood, clutching those little girls while trying to wrap her head around the fact her man was gone. At 39 years old, taken out by the exact same people, he put his life on the line to smarten up. Johnson kept his distance from Betty. It wasn't the place for talk, and frankly, nothing he could say would fix a damn thing. He just stood in that hospital corridor watching the madness, witnessing the fallout of the exact brother-on-brother bloodshed that Malcolm had pleaded with him to stop, and it hit him cold and hard that he blew it. He failed to cover Malcolm, even with all the muscle and reach he had in his pocket. He knew the hit was coming and didn't stop it. Let our own people slaughter a man who only wanted to lift them up. Johnson headed back to his crib that night and sat there completely on his own. They took him out, right in front of his wife, Betty, his 4 little girls, and a room full of people, barred the door, sat in the dark with a bottle of bourbon, running that sit-down from 9 days ago through his head on a loop. Malcolm's voice wouldn't quit ringing in his ears, saying, "Promise me that when I go, that's the end of it, that you won't let brothers kill brothers without doing every single thing you can to shut it down." Come Monday morning, Johnson made the call. It wasn't exactly the deal Malcolm had put on the table. He wasn't ready for that. Couldn't commit to ending all the violence when his gut screamed that going soft meant a death sentence. But Johnson decided on a different play. He wouldn't clip the shooters or the nation's bosses, even though he had the trigger men to wipe their whole New York operation off the map. This move floored his capos when he laid it out at the sit-down Monday afternoon. They figured Johnson would greenlight immediate payback, expected the order to put Talmadge Hayer and the rest in the ground. They were geared up to hit the nation's mosques and take out their top brass. Theodore Teddy Green, one of the 3 guys in the room, gave that number to anyone asking how long Bumpy Johnson and Malcolm X stared each other down above the Palm Cafe. The crowd screamed and scattered while Malcolm hit the floor, riddled with 21 slugs. Instead, Johnson looked them in the eye and said, "Nobody gets touched. Not the gunmen, not the planners, nobody involved in taking Malcolm out. The man didn't want blood. He turned down my protection because he didn't want any more brothers dying to save his skin. I'm respecting that. No payback, no revenge, no bodies." The room exploded with noise immediately. His guys argued it made us look soft, that the nation would think they could hit us for free, and rivals would think Johnson lost his nerve. But Johnson silenced the room. Malcolm asked me to do something a hell of a lot tougher than settling a score. He asked me to break the chain of us, killing our own. And I'm starting that today, not because I lost my edge, not because I fear the nation, but because the man was right. This war between us has to end. And if I couldn't do right by him while he was breathing, couldn't save him when it mattered, then I'll damn sure honor him now that he's gone. The blasts turned his chest to meat and silenced one of the heaviest leaders America ever produced. So, here's the law. We don't clip other black operators. Not for anything. We handle business differently. The next 7 days were the hardest stretch of Bumpy Johnson's life on the street. His crew wouldn't let it go. Word came in that rivals were testing our corners, poking around to see if the no-killing rule meant Johnson couldn't hold his ground. The whisper all over Harlem was that Bumpy Johnson had turned into a marshmallow, that the old lion had no teeth left, and it was time to grab what he was too weak to keep. But Johnson stood his ground like a stone wall. Then on Saturday, February 27th, 6 days after they buried Malcolm, Johnson called another sit-down and went all in. I spent the week chewing on Malcolm's request, wondering if it's doable, if it's worth the price, and if an old dog like me can learn new tricks after 40 years. And I've decided the answer is absolutely yes. From now on, this family runs on a new code. We do not put black men in the ground. The hit shook the world and sparked riots in city after city. Not rival bosses, not the punks who test us, nobody. We figure out other ways to settle our beefs. We sit down and talk. We squeeze their pockets. We dig up alternatives for every single mess. We make deals. We use our leverage. We lean on the neighborhood. If a guy needs a lesson, we break his legs, but we don't put him in the ground. Malcolm is gone because our people couldn't settle a beef without reaching for a gun. I intend to pay my respects by showing there's another way to handle business. It begins right here, with me. If any of you can't stomach that law, there's the door. Walk out while you still can. It was the ultimate screw-up by the top brass at the Nation of Islam. This is the new order of things. Until they carry me out in a box, not a single soul moved. From that second on, Bumpy Johnson dedicated his last 3 years to honoring a pact made with a ghost. The execution, Johnson's way of holding up his end, 1965 to 1968. The shift in how Johnson ran the streets started right then, and the trials never stopped coming. Weeks after they took Malcolm, problems surfaced that the old Johnson would have fixed with a quick bullet to the head. But Johnson laid down a new law, something his crew started calling Malcolm's method: settling scores every way you can without taking a life. The Marcus Williams situation. March 1965. Williams, a young player in the game, figured Johnson's new rules made him soft on turf defense. Williams poached Johnson's bagmen and set up his own numbers joints. He let it be known the old lion lost his teeth. Back in the day, Williams would be cold inside of 7 days. They couldn't settle family business without clipping the very people. Johnson squeezed the supply chain paper, ink, wheels telling them to pick a side, the upstart or the empire. He got the local big shots to lean on the gamblers, telling them Williams's spots were bad news. He pulled strings downtown to have the boys in blue kick in Williams's doors night after night. In the end, he had his boys work Williams over until he needed a hospital bed. He paid the kid a visit and laid it out. "I ain't gonna clip you. I gave Malcolm my word, but I can make you wish you were dead. Pack up or take a beating every week." Williams got the message, ran to Philadelphia, and stayed gone. The numbers war, summer of 1965. 3 separate bosses tried to carve a piece of Johnson's pie all at once. They thought no bodies meant no backbone, so Johnson cut a deal, handing over 10% of the action to keep the peace. For the guys who wouldn't talk, he hit their wallets until they were broke. He set up a sit-down system, letting neutral faces in Harlem call the shots on beefs, who turned their thing into a nationwide operation. He built a commission of the heavy hitters, agreeing to talk it out instead of shooting it out. That move took money out of Johnson's pocket, but it stopped 15 funerals that would have happened the old way. The muscle issue, 1965 to 1968. Johnson's soldiers had to learn a new trade. For 4 decades, the gun was the gavel. Now they had to learn how to squeeze a man's livelihood. They turned the block against a mark and used dirty badges and judges to make life hell. They got inside their heads, making business impossible without pulling a trigger. A beating became a science enough to send a message, not enough to stop a heart. Johnson schooled his captains himself, showing them real power isn't about ending a life. It's about finding a smarter way to win. The price tag, what Johnson gave up. Holding that line for Malcolm cost him plenty. But that hit set something else in motion, too. Turf gone. Rivals took a 15% bite out of his Harlem action when they saw he wouldn't kill for the ground. Johnson decided to shake hands on a loss rather than go to the mattresses. Earnings down. His yearly take slid from $8 million to $6.5 million, a 20% cut. Holding ground without a gun meant taking a hit when a hungry wolf came knocking. Respect shaken. A lot of guys, mostly the young bucks, took his patience for softness. The word on the street changed from terror to respect, with a whisper that he might be slipping. The target on his back grew. Johnson dealt with more heat because the wolves knew he wouldn't put them down. His rules gave courage to men who would have wet themselves facing the old Bumpy. But Johnson paid that tab without blinking, just to keep his word. And when his crew asked if it was worth the bleed, he always said the same thing. It was a move that wouldn't show for weeks, wouldn't make sense for months, and wouldn't be fully grasped for years. Malcolm asked this of me. Malcolm got put in a box because our own people couldn't put the guns away. So if I lose a little coin or turf keeping my word to him, that's a bargain compared to the price he paid. The man laid down his life trying to put a cork in the bloodshed. Cutting into my bottom line to respect his wishes is the absolute minimum. Now, let's talk about the legacy, what that handshake actually built. Bumpy Johnson cashed in his chips on July 7th, 1968, just about 3 years and 5 months after they clipped Malcolm. His ticker finally stopped while he was tucking into a meal over at Wells' restaurant in Harlem. The old man was 62. Thousands showed up for the send-off, racketeers and civilians standing shoulder to shoulder paying respects to a guy who tried to turn the page and honor a fallen king. He proved that even in our thing, you can stop the bleeding if you got the stones to say enough is enough. But Johnson left behind more than just what he built while he was breathing. It was Bumpy Johnson deciding to keep his word to Malcolm, no matter the price. It was the code he laid down. The boys called it Malcolm's Method, and it steered the business in Harlem for decades after Bumpy was gone. The next in line, 1968 to 1975. The heavy hitters who grabbed the reins kept Bumpy's rule about keeping the guns holstered. It wasn't spotless bodies still dropped now and then, but it was tight enough that the fratricide in Harlem took a nosedive compared to how wild it was before 1965. Changing the game, 1970s to 1980s. Other outfits across New York started playing by the same rulebook. They saw Bumpy had proven that cooling the internal wars was good for business and good for survival. They set up ways to handle beefs without reaching for the steel. Sit-downs and squeezing pockets replaced pulling triggers as the first move. The culture shift, 1980s to 2000. Even though 40 years of surviving the streets told him that promise was a death sentence. It became a known fact in Harlem that a boss had a duty to keep the peace among his own. You whack another player without sanction, and you're gonna face some heavy heat from the organization. The hard numbers. The crime stats for Harlem show a serious drop-off that you can't ignore. In mob hits, between our own, after 1965. Especially when you stack it up against the bloodshed from 1945 to 65. That drop lines up perfectly with Bumpy's new decree and the guys who followed his lead. Now, don't think the violence stopped completely, that's a fairy tale. Beef still got hot, and people still got buried. This life still needs muscle, but the rate of incidents went way down. Reaching for a peace wasn't the first option anymore. The idea that bosses should curb the infighting became the standard that guided the streets, even if a few guys broke the rules. Making good on the word. On that Friday, February 12th, 1965, they spoke words that would steer the business of black crime in New York for the next 50 years. And even though keeping that word would completely flip how Johnson ran his business, Malcolm X turned down Bumpy Johnson's offer to handle his light work, refused protection that meant clipping dozens of brothers, and asked Bumpy for a pledge instead. Quit letting our guys gun down our own guys. Johnson couldn't stop them from getting to Malcolm. That hit went down before Bumpy fully bought into what Malcolm was preaching. But Bumpy spent his last 3 years showing that Malcolm's ask wasn't just some pipe dream. It was a solid rule that could actually work on the street, that could be policed, and that could save a hell of a lot of lives when business went sour. The ledger speaks for itself. From 1945 to 65, you had roughly 200 to 250 bodies dropping from syndicate beefs in Harlem. From 1965 to 68, Bumpy's last stretch, only about 15 to 20 hits. That's an 85% cut. From 1968 to 85, maybe 50 to 75 murders. That holds steady at a 70% drop compared to the old days. It would lay down new rules about violence in the neighborhood. Those guys walking around, those hits that never happened, that was Malcolm X's real mark on the Harlem underground. Not from him standing on a soapbox, but from a quiet sit-down behind closed doors. He asked a heavy hitter to change his game, and the man nodded yes. Bumpy Johnson stood by his word. He respected Malcolm's last wish, and by doing that, he didn't just shift his own crew, he changed the whole atmosphere of the black rackets. That change lived longer than both of them and kept hundreds of guys above ground for decades to come. Malcolm X brought nothing to the table. No muscle, no backup, just the weight of keeping a promise to a dead man. Johnson took the deal anyway, giving up cash, turf, and standing to honor what Malcolm had asked of him. It showed even a made guy can flip the script when a man he respects asks him to straighten up. That was the oath he swore. That was the mark he left behind, that would shape the Harlem streets long after both men were in the ground. That is how a dying rebel and an old boss shifted black history in ways neither lived long enough to see. When Bumpy Johnson punched his ticket in 1968, folks asked what he really got done at the end. The bottom line wasn't cash or turf. It was the lives not taken, hits not ordered, and beefs not settled in blood. Malcolm X told Bumpy Johnson to stop letting black men put holes in other black men in the street. Bumpy Johnson gave his word, and for 3 years he held the line, and his crew did too. Harlem cooled down, the violence settled, and the neighborhood stopped trying to eat its own kind alive. That was the deal Malcolm turned down, and the word Johnson kept. That is how they rewrote history together. This is the story of what Malcolm turned down and what Johnson swore to do. The talk those 3 witnesses heard stayed buried for decades because speaking on it was too risky. With the players still breathing, the story doesn't start with Malcolm's end. It starts in the frantic weeks before, when Malcolm knew he had a target on his back, and when Bumpy Johnson made an offer any sane man facing a hit would have taken, but Malcolm pushed away. He did it because he saw a chance to pull off something bigger than just staying alive. The proposal, February 12th, 1965. For 47 minutes, the 60-year-old boss running the Harlem racket, Malcolm X, showed up at Johnson's spot around 3:30 that Friday afternoon, dragging himself up the stairs to the 2nd floor. He moved like a man, drained in body and spirit, like a guy who'd been on the run so long he finally realized there was no way out. All that was left was to settle his affairs before the inevitable went down. He knocked 3 times. The code Johnson's crew knew meant no trouble. He was let into the office, where Johnson held court behind his desk, flanked by 3 of his top guys. The room held the inner circle: Teddy Green, the counselor, Bub Hewlett, the muscle, and Junie Bird, the man who counted the cash. Johnson didn't stay seated when Malcolm walked in. He rose, rounded the heavy desk, and pulled him close, like blood. To the 3 men watching, this wasn't business. It was a rare show of genuine respect. It proved the bond Johnson held for the man, even if they stood on opposite sides of the street regarding the cause. Put every card he held on the table. They saw the same war for liberation, but they fought it with very different weapons. "Brother Malcolm," Johnson murmured, steering him toward a seat, "you look like hell. No sleep, no food. You're driving yourself straight into an early grave. Sit, take a drink. Then we figure out how to keep you breathing." Malcolm took the glass Johnson filled, downed the bourbon in a long swallow, and placed it back on the wood with trembling fingers. "Brother Bumpy, I am grateful for everything you've put in play these last few months. Your soldiers stopped 3 hits. You've bled cash and risked your own neck, providing cover I couldn't find elsewhere. But we know the clock is ticking. The nation wants me in the ground." Elijah Muhammad gave the word. Chicago signed the order. They have dispatched wolves from the mosques in New York, Newark, Philadelphia, all of them hunting me down. They only have to get lucky once. Maybe next week, maybe next month. But it will happen. Cash, heaters, connections, the kind of cold work Johnson had mastered over 40 years to shield Malcolm X from the Nation of Islam soldiers hunting him. The numbers are against us. There are too many of them, and you don't have enough eyes to watch every shadow. Johnson leaned back, reading Malcolm's eyes, spotting the defeat, but also recognizing something deeper. It was a quiet peace, the kind of acceptance Johnson knew well from watching men come to terms with their own end. "Brother Malcolm, I brought you into this room to put a deal on the table. A deal I need you to weigh carefully before you wave it off. Don't let your pride, or the fact that I operate in the shadows, stop you from hearing what I have to say." Malcolm gave a slow nod, silent. "I can wipe the slate clean," Johnson stated flatly. "Every single one of them. Not just the handful of shooters trailing you now, but the head of the snake in Chicago, Elijah Muhammad, the top brass, every captain running this hit squad. And in that time, the 39-year-old rebel, Knowing his ticket was punched for days or weeks, I can put them all in the dirt. Inside of 14 days, it will cost a fortune. It means calling in debts I'd rather keep and bringing heat from the law I usually dodge. But it can be done. I have the reach, the tools, and the men cold enough to handle the job. If I cut off the head, the body dies. The organization crumbles or freezes up, and you walk away. You stay above ground. You continue your work, your speeches, building whatever empire you're planning next. Your girls keep their father. Betty doesn't wear black at 30. You get a lifetime, not a countdown. The silence in the room was heavy enough to choke on. The men present would later swear the tension was thicker than blood, scarier than any gunfight they had ever seen. They remembered exactly who was speaking. Bumpy Johnson, the undisputed king of the Harlem underworld, turned down the muscle and laid out a counteroffer so wild, nobody saw it coming. He was proposing the slaughter of a national hierarchy, a move that would ignite a war. It would rewrite the map of Black America, a body count surpassing anything Johnson had ordered in 40 years of business. The only thing I need, Johnson went on, is the green light. I need to hear you say you want this, that you'll take the cover I'm offering. It means a massacre, and you need to look that reality in the face. You have to decide that drawing breath is worth more than your high ground or your conscience. Give the word, Brother Malcolm. Nod your head, and let me do the dirty work. Let me hold you down the way I've held Harlem for 40 years by teaching the enemy that the price of crossing us is the grave. Say the word, and you live. Malcolm lifted his glass, finished the last drop, and set it deliberately on the mahogany. It went against every code Johnson lived by, leaving the three witnesses questioning their own ears. When he finally spoke, the tone was low but iron hard, the sound of a man who had already played this chess game in his head. The man had already made the call on what his answer would be. No. Johnson looked stunned, truly rattled that a man staring down the barrel would turn away the hand offering to pull him out of the fire. Brother Malcolm, you gotta weigh this carefully. You got to. Malcolm put a hand up, cutting Johnson cold. I ain't had a thought about nothing else for weeks, Brother Bumpy. I weighed the price of staying upright against the cost. I asked myself, if my skin is worth more than the code I've been preaching for years. I asked if surviving justifies the violence that would clip dozens of black men who are just pawns in Elijah Muhammad's crooked game. And the answer ain't changing. I can't take what you're offering. I won't have you dropping nation members, not the soldiers on my tail, not the bosses giving orders, not even Elijah himself, just to keep me above ground.